So basically, I just want to address, and a lot of the points that you made are points that I've actually found in the Quran, subhanAllah. So it's interesting, like we have this question, like, do religious people get anxiety and depression? And we've probably heard these statements so many times that, well, you wouldn't be anxious if you just read more Quran. Here, here's the Quran, just open it. Or no, you can't be depressed. You're a pious Muslim, you pray, you can't be depressed. And subhanAllah, when I hear these things, like my question to these people who say such statements is, are you telling me that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was not a religious person? Was he not pious enough when Allah in the Quran tells him, we know your chest is constricted at what they say, i.e., you're having anxiety from verbal slurs, from verbal abuse of people. Or even when Maryam, radiallahu anha, the mother of Jesus in the Quran, the hardest time of her life, she said, I wish I had died before this. If these feelings are so inherently wrong, why would Allah make it a point to specifically mention them in the Quran and even highlight them over and over again? And the thing is, people of God can get anxiety. They can fall into depression. But what distinguishes us is what we do with that anxiety. Like Arwa was saying, what are we doing about those thoughts? What are we doing about those worries? And in the 3 final verses of Surah Al-Hijr, which is chapter 15 in the Quran, Allah is giving the Prophet ﷺ a solution to that constriction he was feeling. And the whole chapter was mentioning the pressure, the taunting, the verbal slurs of the people to the Prophet ﷺ. And now the chapter ends with 3 verses that if we can all learn from these points, we can take so much out of them, as individuals, as friends, and as families and communities. So Allah here first tells the Prophet, we know your chest is constricted. And before moving on, I want to pause on this because I think this is so profound, like this statement. Allah is literally validating His Prophet. He's attentive to his feeling. And before giving him advice, He is literally making it a point, Allah's making it a point to acknowledge the Prophet ﷺ's feeling. And sometimes, like, the worst thing you can do to someone who's hurting is ignore their pain or brush it off as if it didn't exist. The first thing we have to do is acknowledge their pain. Give them permission to feel the way they feel. And that's the first step to healing, to sit with your feelings. And here in this verse, Allah is literally, telling the Prophet ﷺ his feeling. He's saying, your chest is constricted. That's what's happening. So, now that Allah gave attention to that feeling to the Prophet ﷺ, He now gives him a formula. So first, the feeling is addressed. Now He says fa, which means so. So because you're feeling this, now do this. So it's kind of like giving him ground to stand on. Here's a way to release that constriction. And the next verse says, فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ وَكُنْ مِنَ السَّاجِدِينَ وَاعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ. So glorify your Lord, praise Him, be of those who prostrate, and serve Him until what is certain comes to you. And when you look at these, step by step, we come up with a few of many therapeutic solutions to depression. When we're in a state of hopelessness, sometimes your therapist will tell you the basic thing, a gratitude journal. I think we've heard this concept so much that, the therapist will tell you, well, open up a journal and day by day write things that you're thankful for. And here Allah is saying, hamd, like be thankful. He's telling Prophet ﷺ to remind him to be thankful about his blessings. And when you do that, when you praise Allah, when you're thankful for your blessings, you can't detach those blessings from the one who gave it to you, from Allah. So it's automatically connecting you because you're like, well, who gave me those blessings? Oh, wow, God gave me these blessings. So it's automatically building that connection with Allah. And then the next verb is sabbih, to glorify. And what's interesting about this concept of tasbih is that it comes from the same root word of sabaha, which means to swim. And when you think of somebody being anxious, down, depressed, they feel like they're literally drowning, right? And when you find meaning in God, or you sabbih, right away you're helping yourself keep afloat, stay afloat. And you're preventing yourself from sinking lower and lower. And so that's like that interesting connection between those two. And then just to share a personal note, when I went to therapy myself and I had all these anxious thoughts, and I was telling my counselor, who was non-Muslim, by the way, like Arwa said, I went to non-Muslim, and she was a Christian-based counselor at the time. The first thing she told me to do with my anxious thoughts was, she was like, I want you with because she understood that my connection with God was important. They understand what your values are. So she was like, okay, well, since you want to connect with God, channel those worries, those anxious thoughts into dua or into prayer. So she had me do something called dua journaling, which I didn't even know existed. So, with every worry I had, I would write down my prayer to Allah. And so slowly, with every anxious thought I had, I was dissipating my worries and turning those thoughts into actual tawakkul, or reliance on Allah. And I think that was a very important project for myself. And now in that same verse, Allah is telling the Prophet to be of those who prostrate. And it's not a command. He's not telling him prostrate, istud. He's saying kun, be of those. And here it's like a state of mind. And when you think of mindfulness, I think we hear this a lot. And what does it mean to be mindful? It forces us to be in the state of understanding, well, what is real, what's not real? What is really happening? You kind of zoom out of your situation. What's really happening here? And that's that state of mindfulness. And then the next verb is to u'bud, serve. What are you serving? You're serving your purpose. And then this forces you to ask yourself, well, what is my purpose? Why am I here? And those are all healthy and very necessary questions, when dealing with being down. What is my purpose? And addressing that right away. So now I want to look at the story of Maryam radiallahu anha, the mother of Isa, or Jesus. And she's given this incredibly difficult task of carrying, the only child to ever be born without a father. And it was a miracle to be noted in history forever. And Allah brings attention to her feeling, at the moment of her loneliness. And she's overwhelmed with what was to come. And she says, Ya laytani mittu qabla hadha wa kuntu nasyan mansiya. Such powerful words. She said, I wish I was already dead. I wish I was long forgotten. And in these verses, subhanAllah, of her saying, I don't want to live, you don't see any negative reply from Allah to her. No negative reply. It's actually the quite opposite. He meets her with comfort and care. He sends her company. Allah himself is sending her company. And after that comfort, he's now giving her an action. And he tells her, shake the palm tree to receive the fruit, to receive ripe fruit. And why? We ask why. Well, when we are in a state of complete hopelessness, it's absolutely necessary, to feel a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. And Allah here is telling Maryam, like, you're needed. Your action, Maryam, is going to produce fruit. Can you imagine that sense of empowerment Allah is giving Maryam at this moment? And this it tells us so much that we have to learn from, subhanAllah. And it's as if He's telling her, like, Maryam, like, you can't give up right now. Like, you're needed. Your action is going to do something, subhanAllah. So I think that's very powerful. And now taking you back even more into history, when the Prophet Musa, or Moses, was helping his people leave the tyranny of Pharaoh, or Fir'aun. And you have to understand that these people, under Fir'aun's rule, grew up in oppression. And the world as they knew it was ruled by this barbaric ruler, and that's all they knew. So now in the moments that Musa, or Moses, is trying to save them, he tells them, Ista'inu billahi wasbiru. Like, call out to help for God, and then have sabr, have patience. And you talked about this. So what is patience? Like, for so long, I think, unfortunately, it's been understood that sabr is stagnant. Just endure the pain, and khalas, you just endure the pain. This is your test. But here we learn that it's coupled with asking for help. You have to do something. It's an action verb. Sabr isn't just, that's it. And if it was stagnant, think about it. The people would have stayed under Pharaoh. They would have never left the persecution. But they left the persecution. They moved. And that was a part of their sabr. Moving was a part of their sabr. So don't ever think that my sabr is not doing anything. No, your sabr is what are you going to do about it.
And then waiting for the reply.
Exactly.
After you move.
Exactly. Yeah, you have to do your part. And I think that's very crucial for us as Muslims to understand. And then the next statement he tells them, Musa here, is important also, because he tells them, إِنَّ الْأَرْضَ لِلَّهِ يُورِثُهَا مَنْ يَشَاءُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ. The land is vast and given to those who serve God. So imagine these people, the world as they knew it, the land they knew it only to be Pharaoh's. But Musa is reminding them, hey, this land does not belong to Pharaoh. It belongs to God. And when you serve your creator, that's how you'll see the land as vast. I think us, a lot of times when we serve, the pop culture, or when we serve the music industry, the fashion, society, our own desires, we're always going to feel that sense of constriction. We don't have enough. We're not fulfilled. But when we tie our purpose to Allah, the one who can liberate us, only then can we release that constriction within. And here Musa is teaching these people this very important lesson. So, how many of us have felt like our life is not going the way we want? We're debilitated by our thoughts and sometimes our constant mistakes. How can we get back up? And one reoccurring theme in the Quran is the concept of taking ownership. And you spoke of that briefly. The hardest thing we can do is to face our internal demons dead on. And to look in the mirror and acknowledge your flaws is actually, like you said, one of the hardest things, but it's actually one of the most powerful and courageous things you can do for yourself. And in therapy...
Jihad nafs, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Jihad nafs, yeah, exactly. And in therapy, you can slowly start discovering your personal weaknesses and you're peeling off layers of yourself that have been weighing you down for so long. And sometimes our instant reaction is to be like, wait, those don't exist. Because it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to crack ourselves open. But the thing is, when we let ourselves break open, that's when we can set ourselves free, literally. So my advice would be, is don't prevent those cracks. And here Allah says in the Quran, in Surah Al-An'am, chapter 6, إِنَّ اللَّهَ فَالِقُ الْحَبِّ وَالنَّوَى, that Allah cracks the seed open. And when it cracks, it blooms, And you can bloom too. So embrace your cracks and watch yourself blossom into who you're meant to become. And I love this quote by a counselor who said, remember, growing might feel like breaking at first. And I think that's so powerful because you are going to break, but then you bloom. And that's when you're like, well, this was all worth it. And now I think the best example I can think of in the Quran of the lack of taking ownership is Iblis or Shaitan. And the story is so interesting because it's a famous story we all know that Allah tells the angels, will bow down to Adam. I created Adam, bow down to him. And all the angels obey God's command except Shaitan. And his reason is like, well, you created him from clay. He was too arrogant to obey God's command. But what happens next is so important and interesting that he tells Allah, when he's removed from heaven, Shaitan tells Allah, فَبِمَا أَغْوَيْتَنِي, because of what you did to me. Because of what you did to me, Allah, I'm going to stray everybody away. Can you just imagine this? That lack of taking ownership? And does this line sound familiar? I think so many of us have probably heard people be like, well, you made me yell, right? Mm-hmm. Or you caused me to get angry. All this, I got angry, yeah, but you caused me to do that, subhanAllah. And when we say such statements, we're literally putting Shaitan on a pedestal. And we're making him our role model. And these statements, they all have one common denominator, and that's the lack of taking ownership. The lack of seeing our personal mistakes as mistakes. And that's so important to see that. We're human, we're not flawless. And on the other hand, when you look at Adam and Eve's reply to Allah, in the same chapter, right, just a few verses after, when Allah removes them from heaven, what do they tell Allah? They say, رَبَّنَا ظَلَمْنَا أَنفُسَنَا. Oh Allah, we wronged ourselves. SubhanAllah. They weren't too conceited to admit their mistake. They took ownership then there. We were wrong. How can we correct this? And that's what we should be doing. That is our role model. When we make mistakes, and we will, because we're human again, what distinguishes us from those like Shaitan is our ability to acknowledge our own personal flaws and to see where we went wrong. And the last major issue I want to address, and Arwa, you talked about this also, is the whole of on the surface. I think social media it makes us fall for this trap. But what's important is the image and how people look at us from the outside. This whole on the surface. It's so important for people now, and that's why we're unfulfilled, because the on the surface is just on the surface. Mm-hmm. And Allah addresses this concept in the Quran. He says, فَأَمَّا الزَّبَدُ فَيَذْهَبُ جُفَاءً. He says, what is on the surface, it has no meaning, it dissipates. And then on the contrary, وَأَمَّا مَا يَنْفَعُ النَّاسَ فَيَمْكُثُ فِي الْأَرْضِ. What is beneficial to humanity will actually stick to the ground. And these statements were given when discussing an analogy of water being sent from the sky and then these waters are channeled into different puddles or different areas, and then there's foam that sits on top. So that foam is the zabad. So the foam sits on top of the water for a little bit, then the water washes out and the zabad leaves. So Allah is saying that the foam that left, it went to waste. It served no purpose. But the water that sat there, it had a purpose. And that purpose is that it nourished the ground. And so basically what sat on the surface had no meaning, but what added depth was something that benefited society, something that actually did something to the world around it and benefited it. And that's when we have to ask ourselves, are we living our life as that foam that just sits on top and does nothing? Are we on the surface in our relationships? Are we on the surface with our own self? Like when we don't dig deep, we're on the surface with our own selves. Or are we chasing what is meaningful? Are we diving deep into the water and adding benefit to those around us? And the only way we can live healthy, wholesome lives is when we crash through that surface. And sometimes, as Muslims, for instance, like just give an example, we see a hijabi and we're like, oh my gosh, sister, your hair is showing. But my question is, like, have you asked her about her heart? Have you tried to lift a burden off her shoulder? Have you, added any benefit in any capacity to her life? Again, like, we're just so focused on the surface. So just to end, I want to encourage myself and each and every one of you to really dig deeper into your life and crack yourself open and try to be a benefit to humanity and have empathy, build people up, sit with your feelings, embrace them, acknowledge your weaknesses, and allow them to lead you to that path of healing and growth. Without looking at our weaknesses in the mirror, we won't be able to go into that path of healing and growth. So that's a very necessary step. And then we can channel our worries into dua. That's such an important concept here, because when we put ourselves in circles that draw us closer to our purpose, we're able to fill our hearts, our emptiness, with remedies that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the Prophet ﷺ, like in chapter 15. And then we also, one remedy is to moisten our tongue in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is a type of mindfulness. And we allow its sweetness to penetrate our aching heart. We all have hearts that ache. And when people tell you to be patient, seek help, because that is a part of patience. Seek help and chase after every opportunity that will expand your mind. Just chase it. And know with full certainty that you will add meaning to life. You add meaning to life. And just like Allah Ta'ala, He gave each and every one of us self-worth. He put you on this earth, your heart is beating, and that's a testament to the fact that Allah wanted you to be here. So we have to do our part, shake our tree, like Maryam did, and inshallah we can all watch our fruit fall, like Maryam saw her fruit fall, alhamdulillah.